So many developments unfolding all at once. For more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and the former IDF International spokesperson, our Senior Middle East Correspondent, Ariel Osaran, and Senior Correspondent, Owen Altman. Gentlemen, thank you so much. There is much on the go, all unfolding at once. Kurdish forces start movements against Iran. Jonathan Conricus, your take on exactly that, the significance of a move like this and the timing right now?
Well, it's obviously designed to apply pressure on the Iranian regime. It is to signal to the Iranian regime that there will be pressure coming from various locations, from various ethnic groups. To put things into historic perspective, the Kurds are a large minority in Iran, but they're not the only large minority. Like them, there are the Baluchis in the southeast, the Azeris in the northeast, and other big ethnic groups that probably already are in some stages of similar development. I think we could assess this ahead of time that the Kurds would be first because they are by far the most organized and they have a history of bearing arms and fighting for themselves. And I think this is designed mostly by the US to apply pressure on the regime. Now, to put it to contain it a little bit, I think we shouldn't expect things that the Kurds are not capable of. This isn't an expeditionary force. They do not have the logistics or the manpower or the skill or technology to maneuver across lots of terrain and to present a military threat on Tehran or other centers of gravity of the Iranian regime. But definitely it will present pressure, and it will perhaps bring or motivate other groups in Iran to do the same thing, again, with the desired outcome to apply pressure on the regime. Now, the big question is, how will the Iranian regime respond? Will they respond by lashing out and actually engaging, allocating resources and fighting and with a lot of stress to it? Or will they make the smarter decision, kind of contain the situation and try to focus on other things that they have that are more burning? So far, the Iranian regime hasn't really managed this operation very well, so it'll be very interesting to see how they respond to this new threat.
Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, your take on the developments unfolding as we speak. We turn our focus specifically to Tehran. Intense strikes continue. Of course, the stunning development early on day one, the elimination of the supreme leader, more than 40 Iranian commanders, and right now, more intense strikes continue as we speak. Your take on the success so far of this joint Israeli-US operation?
So, what the IDF and the Americans, but I'll speak more about what Israel is doing, is focusing on a few different types of targets. Priority number one still is, and I think will continue to be until complete destruction, are the missile launchers. That is what the Israeli Air Force is actively hunting. Whenever the Iranians fire, that indicates their location, and then that area and that target is immediately attacked, or it's part of the target bank and hunted for the future. That, of course, has the biggest influence on the overall regional picture, and that influences Israeli civilians the most, and hence the importance. That's number one. Parallel to that, and by the way, the success is quite good. We've heard assessments from both the Americans and Israelis that high number of missile launchers and a very high percentage of missiles have indeed either been taken out or already fired. So that's one. Two, and perhaps more interesting in telling about the real intentions that Israel has, is that for the last day and a half, almost 2 days, Israel has been striking regime targets, proper regime targets in Tehran. Nothing really to do with their military capacity to manage operations, or little to do, more to do with oppressing the Iranian people. And that sends a very strong message, I think, is intended to send a message to the Iranian people and to others that Israel is indeed fulfilling that promise of actually paving the way or opening up the space for the Iranian people to eventually take to the streets when the time is right, and after the Israelis will have loosened up the area a bit. So those are two important parts. The Americans, I think, are focusing mostly on the southern part of the country, on the naval aspect, the whole Hormuz area, with significant success. I wouldn't say that it's done because, as you reported in the beginning, the Iranians have declared the area closed, and we see very limited traffic, if at all. So that's still an effort that is ongoing. But all in all, I would assess that the success is significant. Israel and the US now dominate Iranian skies, except for very few pockets of areas, are able now to use munitions that are less expensive, less sophisticated, because our aircraft are able to be above target, what we call stand-in, as opposed to stand-off, where you have to use different weapons, and that is significant. Last thing, which I think a lot of people who have an interest in undermining the war efforts of Israel and the US is counting interceptors and munitions. To summarize it, I would much rather be on the side of an imperial giant or industrial giant like Israel and US than on the Iranian side. They have real issues with resupply, no ability to manufacture, no real ability to import. So if anybody's going to run out of missiles or munitions, I bet it's the Iranians.
Still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We don't have much time until the break, but we do know that there are Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon targeting Hezbollah sites as we speak. Your take on how this is unfolding right now?
Yeah, there's a report of a vehicle that was struck in Beirut. We'll see who was the target. Vehicle, then probably not Naim Qassem. He probably won't be driving around anywhere.
Yeah, the IDF, sorry to interrupt, just said that it struck a terrorist in the Beirut area, not saying that he was from Hezbollah. When it is Hezbollah, they usually state that. So,
so
very
maybe Hamas, maybe Islamic Jihad, or Revolutionary Guard, could be that as well, Quds Force. Bottom line, Hezbollah did what Israel wanted Hezbollah to do. They made a fatal mistake, I think a strategic mistake, opening up that front, and now Israel is going to execute plans that have been in preparation for a long, long time, with the ultimate goal of weakening Hezbollah to the weakest point that they've ever been.
Yeah, Jonathan, Pete Hegseth is suggesting that these operations are still in the early days, counterintuitive to the idea that things could be getting easier.
Actually not, because what influences the Israeli home front, as we discussed earlier, is the Iranian capacity to fire missiles. War can engulf Iran and other parts of the region without affecting Israel and the Israeli home front. And if the better things go, the less Israelis will be affected by it on a day-to-day basis, and the easier we can or the more we can ease restrictions. At the end of the day, the only thing that we have to keep in mind is that Hezbollah isn't limited by that, and they still retain the capacity to fire long-range rockets, not missiles, but rockets towards central Israel. They fired throughout the day. We had various salvos. Some of them, it almost appeared as if they were timed to be fired parallel from Lebanon and from Iran towards targets in central Israel, maybe in an attempt to trick the defensive systems. So that will still remain until Israel takes that out. I think Israel will be able to do that as well, and it will strike targets in various parts of Lebanon with significant success. But at the end of the day, I think there is a lot of work left to do in Iran, lots of infrastructure, personnel, sites to degrade, etc. And the sooner we can go back to working, producing, eating, and paying taxes, I think that's how the country would prefer it.
So, still in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and former IDF International spokesperson. Donald Trump saying a short while ago the U.S. is in a very strong position on Iran, whose leadership is rapidly going. Something that we were discussing earlier on in the broadcast, your take and assessment on the way things stand right now, both inside Iran, the United States, and in Israel, Jonathan.
So I think a reflection that I have is how fast everything is happening, right? We are just about 5 days into the war, and we are already talking about end state and, the political overall objective of a war, even though it hasn't been a week. That is really addressing the end game here, right? Who will lead Iran and what would it look like? And that's, of course, something that has been heavily contested by various parties. I would assume, this is really where I think if there will be a kind of a division between Israeli targets, objectives, and the real strategic aspirations and those that are palatable for the Americans, I think this is it. Because Israel is in a much more binary situation. we tend to want to see the regime fully dismantled and for Iran really to change its posture and its entire strategy towards Israel, whereas many believe, myself included, that the US will suffice with less, something of a Maduro situation in Venezuela, where it's someone who isn't outwardly hostile towards the US and someone that they can do business with. I hope that Israel will be able to influence things to such an extent that that we really can bring about and set into motion the activities on the ground that eventually will bring down the regime. If that doesn't happen, then the regime will stay in power, and we should assume that we will have to deal with them again in the future. And that's, of course, a dynamic that we're all too familiar with.
In recent days, we discussed the potential legacy that the supreme leader might leave. Now, I ask you the follow-up question. He is no longer. What legacy does he leave?
Well, it's a legacy of failure. We discussed it, and we said that this is what the chances were. But it's a legacy of failure, a legacy of really driving a quite tremendous country with significant human capital and tremendous natural capital, driving it down the drain, driving its economy down the drain, its infrastructure, its international reputation, its pride, its very sovereignty. And it's gambling on a lot of wrong horses against a lot of strong forces, against Israel, against the US. And it's first and foremost a failure of their program to encircle Israel, build that ring of fire around Israel and bring Israel to destruction. Quite the opposite is happening. And I think at the end of the day, that will be his legacy.
The proxies were such a huge concern for Israel. What do you see their abilities and their capabilities under a potential new leader down the line, briefly?
Yeah, I think we are so far a bit underwhelmed by the proxies. And I say that with caution because we should never underestimate our enemies. We've done that in the past and we've learned it the hard way. But I think Hezbollah, we anticipated that they would join sooner and harder. We anticipated that the Houthis would join sooner and harder, but so far they are waiting for orders from Iran, which I don't know why they need to wait. If you want to shoot, you shoot. And it's odd that they haven't done so already. And the fact that Hezbollah joined in is exactly what Israel wanted them to do. I think Israel is in a very good military position to actually dial back years or decades of Iranian investment against it. And it's a good place to be, and I hope that we'll be able to have the political leadership, foresight and focus and keep the momentum going.
Finally, briefly, on-the-spot question. Donald Trump gives the progress so far a 15 out of 10, your rating?
I'd give it a 9 out of 10.
We'll take a 9 out of 10.
And express my tremendous gratitude to our pilots and forces and agents on the ground.
9 out of 10. I think the nation can be happy. We wait to see what lies ahead. Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Jonathan Conricus, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies.